Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for this series of the W. Montague Cobb Institute NMA Health on advancing cardiovascular health innovations and the impact of clinical trials. I have 3 guests with me this evening. I have Dr. Ophelia, Dr. Randall Morgan, and Conchita Burpee. I would love to start with an introduction, starting with Dr. Ophelia.
Oh, okay. Sorry. My turn. Sorry. Yes. Thank you so much, Dr. Stevens. Hello, everyone. My name is Elizabeth Ophelia. I'm a cardiologist with Morehouse Healthcare, and I also bringing my interest in clinical trial, especially around diversity in clinical trial. We will be having a great discussion around that, and I'm looking forward to interacting with the panel as well as our community of listeners. Thank you for having me.
No, thank you, Dr. Ophelia. And Dr. Randall C. Morgan, he is the president and CEO of the W. Montague Cobb Health Institute. Please have a brief introduction.
Thank you very much, Dr. Stevens. It's a pleasure to be here with you and my co-panelists this evening. Very interested in this topic. It's been something that I've been involved in for I would say the latter 3 innings of my career. Early on, I was an orthopedic surgeon and still do practice orthopedic surgery, but now I'm very interested in fairness and equity in terms of health and healthcare, and clinical trials is a major factor in achieving health equity.
Thank you, Dr. Morgan. And Conchita Burpee, our Director of Community Engagement, who has been with the Cobb Institute as a consultant for quite some time. Conchita, please share a brief introduction.
Yes, good evening. Good evening, everyone. And I'm honored to be here among these 2 distinguished physicians and yourself, Dr. Stevens, as well. I'm Conchita Burpee, and I am with the Cobb Institute and have been with them for 9 years, Dr. Morgan. And I am a specialist in marketing as well as research supporting basic community-based participatory research. That's basically what I've been doing for the last several years, working with underserved and underrepresented communities, bringing them more awareness about their health disparities, and interesting enough, educating them on the social determinants of health.
Thank you, Conchita. And Dr. Ophelia, could you begin by giving us an overview of the Equitable Breakthroughs in Medicine Development Project, its primary objectives, what inspired the creation of it, and how the partnership came together?
Yes, thank you so much. So we call the program the EQB Med program for short. And again, when we start talking about breakthroughs in medicine and understanding that, there needs to be a process, and then there's a medication at the end of it that's approved by the FDA. And that's when people have an opportunity to take those meds. So that's a very long process. And what the EQB Med, which, pharma, which is the organization that really represents all of the pharmaceutical industry, who are the majority of drugs that are developed is really done by the pharmaceutical industry. But pharma was concerned about the lack of participation of what we really call underrepresented groups. So it's African Americans, it's Latinx community, and it's even patients in rural areas. And so they asked for a proposal. It was a national outreach to see who has suggestions, solutions. It was sort of a rigorous peer review process. And Yale leads the consortium that came together, what we call network partners. So it was Yale, Morehouse School of Medicine, the RCMI, which is Research Centers of Minority Institution, the Coordinating Center, which is also at Morehouse, and then Vanderbilt. So these organizations solicited their partners, and Cobb was an early and consistent partner in coming to the table, providing letters of support when we were going forward, sharing what assets they would think about, and I'll talk about that momentarily. And of course, that's going to be the subject of this discussion. But the network partners brought in a broad ecosystem of partners that are involved in one way or the other in understanding, promoting, supporting clinical trial diversity. And so the objectives that they put before us as network partners and the collaborators that came to the table is, how can we engage more minority patients? How can we demystify the clinical trial process? How can we bring in people who maybe see doctors out in the community, but they're not necessarily going to large academic centers? How can, in other words, how can more people access good clinical research studies so there will be representation? In other words, we don't want to have drugs being developed where the people are not, the people that are going to take the treatment have not even been a part of the study. So that was the first objective, is to cast a wide net, bring in new sites and work with them, provide infrastructure support, and make sure that they have a chance to succeed. So it's a very comprehensive program, and the initial phase, we call the learning phase, is just 18 months. And we bring in up to 10 sites and basically structure it in a way where we can learn from what's going on. We're not learning on the patients, but we're learning, is this site able to stand up a trial with our support, with the support of our partners, and therefore able to basically sustain being a site. So pharma wants to be able to come back to very good sites and have them join up to participate in clinical research and clinical trials.
Outstanding. Thank you. Yes, we can definitely hear why diversity in clinical trials is so crucial for the development of medical treatments. Dr. Morgan, can you elaborate on the historical mistrust that exists within communities of color regarding clinical research?
Yes, thank you very much for that question, Dr. Stevens. And actually, the way we look at that question is changing as time goes on. I think probably COVID had something to do with that change. Whereas before, the reluctance was totally based upon really the history, and I will say the United States Public Health Service study, which occurred in Tuskegee, Alabama, beginning in the mid 1930s, around syphilis, with a major weakness being the lack of consent and the lack of education for those who were a part. And so this has become the poster child of all the ways not to perform clinical trials. And it's amazing that we still have to lead with any explanation of clinical trials with an ability to understand the frustration that the African American community has around Tuskegee. However, we've had programs recently where many speakers are stating that there are other examples of the lack of concern for people throughout our history, and it's not just Tuskegee. Certainly, we remember the Henrietta Lacks situation at Hopkins, for which there was an apology. And I will say that the National Medical Association was present, because I was the president at that time, for the apology for the Tuskegee experiment and with President Clinton, which was a remarkable day. But there was also an apology, as you know, extracted from Johns Hopkins around the Henrietta Lacks. And again, without consent, using anatomic specimens from a patient, not only for one experiment, but for literally a treatment for decades. So very difficult for Black people to overcome these types of misuses of their trust. And then to throw on top of that the changes of trying to understand vaccines in real time and whether they were safe or not, and whether or not African Americans should really participate in the trials for vaccines, as well as vaccine hesitancy, which has been a problem. So that it's multifaceted. History is a part of it. There are many other examples we could give, but in spite of that, programs like EQB Med, I think, will help us to overcome, for once and for all, many of these historical concerns.
Absolutely, absolutely. Now, Dr. Ofili, what strategies does EQB Med employ to combat misinformation and build trust within these communities?
Very, very good question. And I'm going to just build on, piggyback on what Dr. Morgan was just sharing. So we've learned, again, this is many, many groups, including Cobb Institute, with their All of Us program, which I'm sure Dr. Morgan will share, that it's important that you go to trusted providers. So you can stand up a trial, and, if people are really, really sick and they want to participate, maybe they will. But it really helps if they hear from their doctor that they trust, to say, you know what, I want you to join this. And we've learned in all of our studies, sometimes the doctor starts talking to the patient, goes, do you think I should do it? And you go, yes, I'm going to do it. So that trusted provider is a key sort of foundation for what EQB is basically trying to tap into what has been developed for many years in the African American and Latinx community. And so that's why the framework is, first of all, if we have a site that we'll think will be part of the learning phase, how are they connected to the community? What have they done with the surrounding community? What is their track record? They don't have to have done clinical trials. That's not a requirement, because we know some of the sites will be essentially what we call trial naive. They want to do it, they want to learn, but they already have the credentials in terms of their community engagement, their sort of alignment with community values. And that's a critical step that we have tapped into. And so far, it's really helping. The other step that we tapped into is advisors. So, for example, Cobb is an advisor. In addition to Cobb also coming up to say we have a role to play. We have experience with reaching providers and communities. So we have a network of many institutions that came together. They're church-based institutions. Some of them are community-focused institutions. Some of them are professional affiliated institutions. And that allows us to have essentially a broad base to say, as we're learning, not only are we getting feedback and advice, but we're also putting some of that into practice through these sites.
Absolutely. Now, we keep mentioning community and that word and that engagement. And so, Conchita, could you discuss the role of community engagement in advancing clinical trial diversity?
I sure can. The first thing I want to do, I would like to define community, because a lot of people have different definitions of what community is. So as I reference community, to me, a community is a group of people living in the same place or space and having particular characteristics in common, and those who care about each other. So for me, that's the definition that I'm going to be referring to. And as Dr. Ofili was saying, the key role through my experience in community engagement to advance clinical trial diversity is listening. The first thing that I feel we need to do is to listen. I have been involved in clinical trials and research for the last 15 years, and I can't believe the number of people who embrace clinical trials and research. All they want someone to do is listen to them, to include them in the process. barriers are there, but I find that they are, how can I say, related in terms of Gen Zers are not too familiar about those old myths. Not necessarily myths; those things have happened, but they're not aware of it as much as those who are from the baby boom generation, or so they're not familiar with it as much. But listening, people want to be heard. And unfortunately, in Black and Brown communities, research hasn't necessarily been informed. They haven't been informed about research. They haven't been included in research. Research is not discussed. So it's a new process for them. So listening is a key role. And the process can be the same. And the process that we're talking about today is very good. However, it's extremely important, as Dr. Ophelia mentioned, is to build trust. And to build trust will advance research of any kind.
Indeed, absolutely. And so going back to thinking about local communities and faith-based organizations, how can those community-based organizations and programs contribute to advancing equitable representation in trials?
Well, thank you. I think maybe I'll just add that these community organizations really become the trusted voices. And a lot of what we have done with All of Us programs and others, the physicians or the health experts have been the trusted voices. But I think in order to be a success in the community, it has to be inverted so that the community members actually become the trusted voices. And of course, the perfect example is always the minister. But there are lots of other individuals that are first line in terms of health in communities that really are much more important, I think, to a long-standing relationship with a community. And so, yeah, I think we should look at it a little bit differently.
Absolutely. And then Conchita, I would love to hear from, yes, you as well.
I agree with Dr. Morgan in terms of trusted voices with ministers. And leaning into these organizations absolutely accelerates the message about clinical trials. But I have learned with many research in clinical trials, it's not always the message, but it's the messenger. It's who delivers the message. And my experience in Black and Brown communities, word of mouth is the most important and successful form of communication and advertising. Word of mouth goes a long ways. These organizations provide trusted voices that can break down barriers for equitable breakthroughs, as this organization is trying to do. And it's very important to know that once the information is given in the community, that piece of information will be shared among the community. Again, I can't stress the importance of word of mouth in Black and Brown communities. It goes a long way and it builds trust within the community.
Absolutely. And Dr. Ophelia, your thoughts?
Yeah, so I think that's just well stated in terms of the messenger. And when you think about it, what pharma is trying to do with EQB Med is essentially to borrow the earned trust. And when you're borrowing something, you have to be careful because there has to be, the earned trust allows you to sort of bypass some steps, but there's still a lot of learning that needs to happen. And if there's any hint that this is now business as usual, all of us go down with it.
Yes.
We're the ones who came up and go, yeah, we know the community, we've worked with them, and we've earned the trust. And that's all the more reason I think we'll be able to talk about this later, where people need to get comfortable with the concept of borrowing earned trust. So when you're going to borrow something, you have to be careful that obviously you take care of it, because if you mismanage it, then the whole thing, we go back much further, even it would have been better not to have started at all. So I think I'm not trying to be negative, but people need to understand when you're coming to these communities, the communities have needs, and we are using the word communities just like that. But when you start engaging, you see people have high blood pressure, they have diabetes, they have cancer. They're asking, am I taking the right medicine? Should I be doing something else? How does exercise work with my medication? Those are all very, very good questions. And if we go in and we want to do a drug study, we need to be ready to talk to them about, number one, how can you join this, learn from it? Because it's also about where they're at with their knowledge and how we can help engage with them to advance that knowledge all across, even in their disease condition.
Yeah, absolutely. Dr. Ofili, how does EQB Med ensure that clinical trials are accessible and sustainable for participants from diverse backgrounds?
Fantastic. Excellent question again, Dr. Stevens. And we sort of started to touch on that. So when we say accessible, what does it mean for a trial to be accessible? Dr. Morgan was referencing earlier what happened with Tuskegee, with Henrietta Lacks. So accessibility means there's a way to make sure people actually understand what you're saying they should participate in. And now with the IRB, which is a big word, but with institutional review boards, we know there's a lot of effort to say, okay, it's complicated to design a drug, to talk about curing cancer, curing heart disease, curing diabetes, but you have to break it down to eighth grade, no more than eighth grade, not because everybody's at the eighth grade reading level, but you want to set it up so it's broadly accessible. The language has to be understood. And then the other thing about accessibility is, where are people getting their care? If someone is going to a federally qualified center or seeing their primary care doctor in the community or cardiologist that's in the community, and all you're doing is setting up this site at a big academic center, then that's not accessible. So EQB Med was focused on, again, bringing in these community sites, a diverse group. So like we have a mandate to, I don't know if it's a mandate, but we have a suggestion to work initially in the Southeast because of the high risk of cardiovascular disease, stroke, essentially much of all the diseases, as well as the Southwest with Texas. So our sites are in that geographic location. But the other reason is there are lots and lots and lots of people who are receiving care, whether you're looking at a community-based site in South Carolina, community-based site in Texas, community-based sites in Atlanta, Georgia, the community facing. So that's the big part of the accessibility is who is joining, who is being brought on board. How are we understanding? So for example, Latinx patients. Well, if you're doing a trial and you have no intention of translating stuff, whether it's a Haitian language or Latino, those patients have no access, whatever else you've done. So it's expanding what access is. Then what about coming in and out of the doctor's office for these studies? Somebody has to get transportation, pay to get to the doctor. That's also access. If you don't build in funding to say, okay, you're going to take off work or childcare, those are all part of access. And of course, EQB Med can't solve every single one of those, but it's understanding it when you build a protocol so as many people as possible can participate, and then valuing their time. So you give essentially a stipend to take care of what they're actually putting. They shouldn't be coming out of pocket to do a study.
Indeed, indeed. Earlier, you mentioned the learning phase of EQB Med being about 18 months.
Mm-hmm.
What measures are in place to make sure that the participation in these trials lead to long-term benefits for the communities involved?
Yeah, this is an excellent question. So when we started with the learning phase, this is what happened. So pharma says, okay, we're 18 months, and then we'll be done. And we're explaining to them that maybe it's going to be longer than 18 months because we can only travel at the speed of trust. Now, everybody says that now because if we just say, okay, here, get me all the sites, and we haven't done the due diligence, sites, we haven't engaged our community partners to look and tell us, okay, this makes sense in this direction. So the learning phase is the learning phase. We have convinced pharma to just allow us to move at the speed of trust. And part of that is, if you're placing a trial, pharma wants to know, can we come in and now access that site? And in order for us to say you're accessing that site, then this goes to your question about long-term benefits. We need to make sure, for example, let's say it's a community health center. They're doing this study now. Do they have the staffing support? Do they have the technology that would allow them to bring people in? Do they have a way to communicate with, as I talked about, with language, etc.? The accessibility leads to long-term benefits and the opportunity to sustain it. Sometimes when we talk about long-term benefits, as we discuss with participants about trials, people are really thinking everyday things. I every day I go to the doctor to tell my blood pressure is high. Can I get in a study? Or I was diagnosed with something. Maybe it's cancer. Maybe it's lupus. What is a study that's available? So it's us communicating that these sites will now have the capacity to do a breadth of studies. So it's cardiometabolic, which includes diabetes, stroke, but it's also cancer studies. So we're thinking that as we're coming into these communities, our communities, to promote this, we're also wanting to get our community members, and sometimes these are community health workers. Sometimes the community members are obviously church-based organizations, but the community health workers are an important part of how you translate benefit. Because again, that's a job. That's a job for someone in the community. But that's a job for someone who understands the language, someone who knows all their neighbors. And that's part of what we're emphasizing is it's got to be these. And we also have a model of community ambassadorship that Yale pioneered, where the people who know about research are going out and speaking to their neighbors, to their church members. Those are all the measures we have in place by way of infrastructure, by way of how we're communicating the benefits. You don't want to oversell it. When somebody is participating in a trial, the reason it's called a trial is, for example, sometimes you're randomized, like flipping a coin. Some people will be in placebo, some people will be in the active drug, because we got to find out, how does it work, who does it work for, and not just make an assumption, because then we're basically condemning people to years and years and years of using drugs that has not been well tested.
Indeed. Thank you for sharing that. Dr. Morgan, could you share the Cobb Institute's projects related to EQB Med being a partner?
Sure, Dr. Stevens, I'd be happy to. I would like to emphasize that one of the things that we have found with the Cobb Institute, not just with clinical trials, but with many of the programs that we've been involved with over the past few years, is that if African Americans or Latinos in particular are spoken to learn about what it is we're speaking, what the opportunities are, how their health can be improved in real time, not rushed, however long it takes to have that discussion. If you have to have two discussions and you have to have family members come, whatever it takes, once you get that trust because of the person to person conversation, there's no difference in acceptance of participation in clinical trials. And I think Dr. O'Feely would probably state that.
Yeah.
So that's a lesson for the Cobb Institute, because community involvement was the last piece or the last pillar that the Cobb Institute really Cobb Institute, the last pillar that the Cobb Institute implemented. But now it is the most powerful pillar. And it is the one that I think is going to allow the Cobb Institute to be most effective by sharing messages, sharing the science, showing people that you actually get much better care if you participate in clinical trials. It's
Yeah.
really an opportunity. It's a privilege.
Mhm.
It's an opportunity for a community. But the Cobb Institute, through its experience, can edify the clinical trials in a community, uh, maybe just at the right time. So I'm excited about this, not only because of the outstanding institutions of which we've had the fortune to partner with, like Morehouse and RCMI, uh, but because I see a way that we can bring something unique based on the experiences that we've had, that merges science, confidence, trust, innovation, and analytic skills.
Outstanding. Thank you. Now, diving into our insights from cardiovascular research, Dr. Ofili, based on your extensive experience in this area, what insights can you share about the importance of inclusive research in this field?
Absolutely. Thank you again, Dr. Stevens. So if we think about it, and we talked about this in this webinar, is African Americans have disproportionate impact in terms of cardiovascular disease, cardiometabolic disease. Part of it is it's not that African Americans are not resilient. In fact, the reason is there are so many stressors that you would actually be shocked about how some people are getting up every day, doing all the things they're doing, and then still surviving. So part of the discoveries that we've done in cardiovascular is if there's opportunity for early understanding and diagnosis of a condition, and there's an opportunity for actually good empathic therapy where somebody doesn't feel like, oh, I'm just a guinea pig. You're just wanting to just write this stuff, get me out of the office and bill insurance. Somebody truly understands that you have my best interest at heart. They will come to your office understanding that, okay, I'm the one who has the health condition. I want to get better. What happens sometimes, unfortunately, is when people see you've got 5 or 6 conditions, there's an assumption that maybe there's something wrong with you. There's not anything wrong with you other than that you have those conditions. So that's one of the things we've learned about inclusive research. Because if you bring someone with their lived experience, whatever that is, with their cultural background, with their understanding, because they have a lot. Also, the other thing we never talk about is the wisdom. They come with the wisdom and knowledge about their disease because this is why they survived this long. And then you ask them, okay, how can we work together? And even in the context of a clinical trial, because when in the studies that I've run, when people come in with congestive heart failure, and they're coming in and you're talking to them about, you're going to watch your diet, then we're going to take this medicine. We need to see how the medicine works with everything else that's going on with you. When people understand that, and then they see, my patients will come in and say to me, I did not know if I went for a walk, my blood pressure would come down. Imagine that kind of aha moment for patients, knowing that they themselves can make, and believe me, African American patients, they love to talk to their friends and neighbors about what's going on with them, their relatives. They love to say, what natural medicines can I take so I can reduce these other medicines you take? None of these are bad. They're all good because that means whoever that person is engaged, because being engaged is 50% of the cure for everything that ails us, believe it or not. So that's what I've learned in terms of the importance of inclusive research. Bringing everybody and their lived experience actually helps us as we're developing these therapies, because then there are things that we understand would work once the drug is out there, based on the patient population that we were able to pull in. Those are some of my insights.
Wow. Awesome. Could you share some key findings and implications from the African American heart study in particular?
Oh, thank you so much. Yes, how much you got? No, I'm kidding. So, the thing about the African American heart study, for many of us in cardiology, we've understood the compound called lipoprotein little a. It is a form of cholesterol, but it's even, I'm going to use words like sticky. It's even stickier than LDL, which many people know as a bad cholesterol. So lipoprotein little a actually leads to higher risks of stroke, of heart attacks, and even clogging of the arteries in the legs. And we were trying to understand what does this mean, because the levels are more common and higher in blacks, and I'm living example. I have high lp little a. I didn't even know I have high lp little a. It is genetically transmitted. And when my daughter was at the American College of Cardiology meeting, everybody was talking about LP little a. She went and got herself there. She came back. She goes, "I don't understand this. I'm doing everything right. Why is my level high?" And I said, "Oh, don't worry about it. Just as long as you're doing everything." She said, "Well, you need to go get yourself checked." And so I did. I'm a cardiologist. I know what my LDL is, but I didn't know what my LP little a is. My LP little a is exactly the same number as hers. Maybe difference about 3 or 4 points. That's the thing about the genetic thing. And what I love about the African American heart studies, we are focusing effort on something we know, not just about drug, but it's about understanding what does this look like if you have it, if you've had a heart attack, or if you haven't. What does that do to your course of the disease? Even as well, right now there are no drugs to treat LP little a, but there are 3 or 4 companies looking to how to advance the research to do that. And what I love about the African American heart study is we've got a group of doctors. They're Black doctors, there are a few white doctors, a few Hispanic doctors, but what's different about each of them is the patient population they have. And all of them were recruiting 5,000 people. We're now halfway through 2,500. Every single one of them, they're going to talk to, they can recruit up to 250. Many of these doctors that never did research before, they're so excited. They're talking to their patients about it. I should give credit to the Association of Black Cardiologists, who's our community partner, helped to create the brochures. Credit to Morehouse School of Medicine, academic partner, helped with the community advisory to make sure what we're talking about makes sense from a community engagement standpoint. And now we're halfway there and excited because the findings and implications, obviously we haven't opened the entire data, but the early findings is if you talk, people are knocking to participate, more people than we can bring on, because they have to have criteria. They have to be a case or control. Many people coming in, they want to join, but they're not matched to a case. But that just tells me that if you go out there into the community, explain about the condition, talk about the underlying genetic basis, people are learning. People are going in and getting themselves checked now, just like I did. And then whenever the drug treatment comes up, we have a group of people who are already clued in to this condition and saying, I'm doing everything I can right now. I'm exercising, my diet is good. What else can I do? Because I don't want to have a stroke at an early age. Those are the benefits that we're seeing, just even around the dispelling myths, making sure we get the right information, that people are not confused about what this is, because that's the worst thing we can do, to confuse people.
Absolutely, absolutely. And Conchita, so regarding
Yes.
participant involvement, for our participants today, what steps can they take to support clinical trial diversity in their own communities?
Something, I was listening to Dr. O'Feely, and I tell you, everything you said, I've experienced in the community, face to face, talking to people, and they want to talk. So
Yeah.
my advice to folks who participate, who want to participate, who'd like to participate in clinical trials diversity, is talk it up. We don't talk about it enough. Talk about it with your community organizations. Add it to the topic with your health ministry leaderships within your congregation. Also with your physician. Trusted voices with your physician. You got a lot of pharmaceutical companies who knock on the door of physicians who offer a lot of information up. So your physicians, a trusted voice, talk to them or the practitioners there about what's happening with clinical trials and research. Just as you plan your community health centers in your community, make sure that there's a health study or research or someone there to talk about clinical trials besides myself.
Mhm.
Out there, they want to know more about clinical trials. They want to participate. It's not like they don't want to. They've never been invited to. So it's
Exactly.
very important to talk it up, I do believe. And of course, contact the Equitable Breakthrough in Medicine Development or contact the network partners mentioned in the opening. And I'll say this because it's something I believe in. When a community is healthy, all will prosper.
Amen.
Absolutely.
That's so true.
Dr. Morgan, I noticed this summer that the Cobb Institute had some mentees and some interns exposing them to clinical trial diversity research. What are your thoughts on other mentors exposing their mentees to this world?
Well, it's thank you again for that question because it is so important, and everyone can be a mentor, particularly to early career clinicians. And what we have tried to do with the Cobb Institute is create a formal program that we call the Cobb Scholars Program that encourages those who have completed their basic training in medicine or veterinary medicine or pharmacy as they are working on their specialties to become physician scientists or dentist, pharmacist scientists, or creating that feeling that they would like to combine their career and learn about areas that they had not even thought were possible for them. But as we have done this, we've found that bringing younger, even medical students, in some cases undergraduate students who have interest in science, that clinical trials is a great opportunity for them to learn about careers, to learn what they can aspire to be, and to actually participate. They could be on an IRB. They could work in a site in the summer. They can do all kinds of things to enrich their knowledge. So I think that we have to take this advantage, uh, the advantage of participation of as many young people as we can put our hands on and mentor them, even by suggesting that they participate, checking up, making sure they participate, um, and maybe not be so formal at it, but just kind of make sure we keep pushing them. As Conchita said, the more researchers that we have, a rising tide lifts all boats. And so I think is what we have found with the Cobb Institute, that we have these programs, but then sometimes the sidebar conversation becomes a greater mentoring opportunity than the special program. So we try to do all of these things and are very excited to participate with EQB Med.
Outstanding. Now, Dr. Feely, what are some of the most significant achievements of EQB Med so far? And looking ahead, what are some goals?
Yes, thank you so much. Yeah, so far, it's really been very gratifying to, for me personally, working with some sites. For example, Texas Southern University is a RCMI school, so they're like obviously a university, but they have extensive community engagement, have never done clinical trials. So we brought them on, got a lot of learnings. As part of that process, the network partners, went to Texas Southern campus. They're affiliated with a cancer program, and heard from these lots and lots of individuals who have cancer. This is like just real world, talking about their struggles and about how committed they are to clinical research, and many of them saying, "This saved my life." So that's the center that has not yet done clinical trials, but they've done a lot of community engagement. And they brought all of these people to the table, and people are excited. So to me, that's a big accomplishment, is now connecting that site's aspiration to do clinical trials with their wealth of knowledge, trust, earns trust with folks that they've been joined with in even just taking care of them from a cancer standpoint. And I have found, and again, this echoes across. We currently have 6 sites that have been onboarded. All 6 sites is similar. The other piece that cuts across all of them is the ambassadorship we talked about. People who are representative of whatever that condition is. They've experienced it. They've been part of a trial.
Mhm.
There's no one that can do a better job in
Right.
talking about research and clinical trials than the cultural ambassadors. So that's another thing, the training of that, and now people are out there starting to bring trials on board. And then in terms of our upcoming goals, we're supposed to get a total of 10 sites, so we'll get 4 more sites to onboard. But importantly, it's drilling down in terms of the connectivity that each site needs to sustain the effort. One of the things that we've known for a long time, and I know Cobb knows this, Dr. Morgan, and I'm sure Conchita does, the reason Black patients, Latino patients participate in trials, sometimes, yes, it's about their own health, but a lot of the times it's about their generational health, generations behind them. If there's a condition, they don't want to keep that cycle going. To me, it's learning about that, seeing that in action with all of these sites that is so gratifying. And we really, within EQB Med, will tap into that. We're already talking about what does the next stage look like beyond the learning phase. For example, as I mentioned, pharma has been asking, when can we place trials? And we said, just slow down. And now we're getting close and we're going to tell them, okay, now you can start placing trials. But importantly, we want to keep looking at you guys. Did you involve the community in the design of that trial? Did you look to see,
Exactly.
is that something that they just join? Do they need extra help? Should you give them more funding? I'm not talking about the site, I'm talking about the participants themselves. So that next phase, we're going to now have, as we open up what they call a front door mechanism, so new trials can be brought in, we're going to be monitoring through focus groups, through engagement of the community leaders, community health workers, cultural ambassadors. How are we doing? Always asking, how are we doing? Because I think we're always going to learn new things and understand that to sustain this, we always have to continue to improve and remain faithful to that goal. Is the community getting any healthier? If not, something is wrong.
Right.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, thank you to our panel today for just all your insight and expertise. It's truly been an honor. But before we conclude, are there any final thoughts or messages you'd like to share with our audience? And I will start with Conchita.
You know, I was listening to Dr. Ofili, and I am so happy to hear that this clinical trial, diversity clinical trial, will have locations for sustainability. Because one of the things that I've heard across the United States, as the Cobb Institute has had many collaborations, and we've been in many communities of color, is one and done. You have a lot of studies that come into the community just to get some information, and they disappear. They don't even come back to give you the results, the outcomes of that. I am so happy to hear that there's going to be several locations. But also what's important, and I hope it will happen, is to have marketing materials that resonate with the population and that speak to the population directly. And ensure that everybody is not digitally educated. So you have to always have that 1-800 number. I know it sounds crazy, but you got to have that 1-800 number in there because everybody is not digitally educated as we think they are. So those assumptions shouldn't be made.
Yeah.
Outstanding.
Yeah.
Thank you, Conchita. Dr. Morgan, final thoughts.
Thank you. I am excited about this venture because the sites are being placed where it makes sense. that they should be. And heretofore, as we've worked with pharma and tried to support pharma in enrolling in whatever study it happens to be, the impediments are so great because of lack of access, or because of attitudinal issues, or because the communication is very poor. So to have an opportunity to start and develop sites that are going to take into consideration all of those specificities, I think is going to lead to success.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Morgan and Dr. Ofili. What are your final thoughts? And then how can people stay informed about or get involved with the EQB-MED project?
Yes, thank you again, Dr. Stevens. This has been just fabulous, and I definitely appreciate the work that the Cobb Institute is doing through Conchita's effort, Dr. Morgan, yourself. This is really our message, that partners like Cobb are who we need to ensure that whatever is being built is actually relevant to the community. And one key message that I would have is there's always going to be misinformation and disinformation, unfortunately. We should go to organizations like Cobb. The EQB Med now has a growing network. The website is being rolled out. We'll make sure Cobb has that, because it doesn't make sense in 2024 that someone would tell you something and you believe what they say. Sometimes they're not meaning to be malicious, but sometimes they just don't know and they don't want to say they don't know. I'm just shocked at how many people see something online, take it as gospel, and then pass it along. So my word here to everybody is encourage you. Doing the research is not difficult. Connect with an organization like Cobb, connect with the EQB Med sites, and like I said, we will share the website has just been rolled out. The partners are being connected to it. We never want you to, learn about something and think, oh, that doesn't apply to me. I don't have this condition. Make sure you're working with as much information as possible. And I couldn't emphasize that more. Don't assume that because somebody said your blood pressure is always going to be high, that it should be high. There's nothing like that. Black people don't live with high blood pressure. It's not normal. So just understand that there's help, but you have to access the help for yourself and your members of your family.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for that. Again, I thank you all for your time. We will be back next month with the Cobb Institute with BDO, and our series continues about EQB Med. So take care and be well, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you.
you.
Great.
Good night.
Thank you, Dr.
Thank you,
Feely.
everyone.
Bye-bye.